We're asking, will Brexit damage the environment? Joining us to debate this are the Labour MP for Wakefield and Chair of the Environmental Audit Committee, Mary Creagh, and the former Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and Conservative MP for North Shropshire, Owen Paterson. Welcome to you both. OK, Mary Creagh, Brexit's happening. What are your concerns from the environmental perspective?
Well, our concerns on the Environmental Audit Committee are, as you say, the European Union has been overwhelmingly positive for Britain's environment, and that when we leave, some of those protections cannot be neatly cut and pasted into UK law. So, as a committee, we've recommended we need a new Environmental Protection Act to write into UK law certain principles, the precautionary principle, the principle that the polluter pays, and the issue that we deal with pollution at source rather than tackling it further down the line. So important on things like microplastics.
What is a precautionary principle?
It basically means if you think something's going to be bad, you don't try it and see if it's bad. You basically don't do it. You find alternative ways around it. And that has stimulated a lot of innovation in our country. We've got greener products, we've got greener energy, we drive cleaner cars. Those things will be lost when we leave. And of course, the legislation that is incorporated into UK law will no longer be enforced, updated or enacted. So it's no good to us having zombie legislation. OK,
Owen Paterson, do you think the European Union has been good for the environment globally and indeed more importantly here?
No, it's been terrible for the environment. If you take the fisheries policy, 1 million tonnes of fish thrown back into the sea as pollution every year. It's disastrous. These directives everyone's talked about, they are adaptations from world conventions, which we were proud instigators of. So the UK was early player in the Berne Convention, the Ramsar Convention, CITES, and what we can do, now we've got this wonderful opportunity, is to readapt those world conventions, which we are strong supporters of, to our own environment. What's happened is the EU has made a power grab. It's tried to adapt these world conventions to a whole EU environment, the whole continent, and it's not working. So we have a marvellous opportunity to readapt those conventions in our own legislation, as Mary says, and we should certainly have an environment bill to do that. But we can strengthen it, we can update it, we can adapt it. European legislation is completely rigid. The other key point on this is we will get back control of our borders, and we have a serious problem with invasive species, and we will be able to control plant imports and animal imports with a massive gain to our environment.
So we can do it properly without Europe and Brussels interfering?
Well, I think Owen's talking down, in some cases, his own government, because, of course, when he was Environment Secretary, Richard Bennion, who was the Fisheries Minister, renegotiated the whole issue around the fisheries debate, and we banned discards as part of the European Union. So the discards, the throwing back of fish, is changing. We want to be, we were in the European Union, we were able to influence that legislation. We also have people who have historic fishing rights in our waters. So the idea that we're going to have a UK fisheries policy is for the birds, I'm afraid. We are still going to have to negotiate with Iceland, Spain, Holland, and different fisheries organisations that have territorial claims around British waters. And I think the difficulty with the conventions that Owen sets out is that they have no enforcement mechanisms. So we're part of these conventions, but if we don't abide by them, there's no regulation, there's no big stick, there's only the carrot. And I'm afraid the history has shown us that in the dark days of the 60s and 70s, we were the dirty man of Europe. We talked clean and green, but we acted dirty, and we don't want to go back to those days.
Well, I would wholly disagree. The common fisheries policy has been a biological, environmental, economic and social disaster. It cannot be reformed. Richard manfully negotiated through the discard ban and several other proposals which I put through in my green paper over 10 years ago. But with a quota system, the discard ban simply does not work. We can have our own regime tailored to our own marine environment, and we will ensure that everyone within our EEZ will adhere to our regime. And we could have an effort-based system, which means that everything that's landed everything that's caught must be landed, must be counted. We will know exactly what's going on in our marine environment. And the conventions, we can adapt. We'll have our own parliament back. We'll be able to move those conventions rapidly onto new environmental threats. So we'll be much more powerful adapting legislation to our own environment.
But, I mean, let's just take fishing for example before we move on. I mean, one of the points is fishing industry has contracted in this country, and fishermen hope that they'll get livelihoods back. But there's also a problem with overfishing, and those policies, like the common fisheries policy, were designed to limit the intrusion of other countries into our waters or into common fishing grounds. If we come out, we won't be able to police that, will we?
No, honestly, I'm afraid that's terribly wrong. I spent a lot of time going right across the North Atlantic over 10 years ago. Norway, Faroes, Iceland, Newfoundland, New England. Nearly all those areas have thriving marine environments and thriving fishing communities because they have a sane fishing regime. And they work in close collaboration. You've got large tracts of the North Sea with the Russians, the Norwegians, the Icelanders, and the European Union working together. We will be able to establish control within our EEZ and have a tailor-made fishing policy and a marine environment policy tailored to our fish and our environment, which can only help not just our own fishing communities, but all those who work in processing as well.
Well, I'm concerned also what Owen said about control of imports, because, of course, what that implies is a huge amount of customs and non-tariff barriers. So you talk to the horticultural industry, they'll be saying, we are very concerned about how we are going to have to pay extra and have tariffs on things that we sell currently tariff-free to the European Union. Let's look at the farm industry. Our committee identified that farmers face a triple threat from Brexit. They face a flood of cheap imports from countries like the USA and New Zealand, who produce lamb and beef much cheaper than we can. They face the threat of tariffs on their exports that are currently tariff-free to the European Union if we come out of the customs union, as Owen wants and as Theresa May wants. And finally, they face the threat of a loss of CAP subsidy. And we've had no guarantees from the government about any future CAP. And of course, that means that farmers are already making their decisions in 2 years' time. They don't know what their businesses are going to... this accounts for 60% of farm incomes in the UK. Farmers are extremely concerned about this. And this affects how the landscape is farmed in our country.
Well, I'm afraid I totally disagree again. Your first point on tariffs, I'm all in favour of reciprocal free trade.
But you can't get that once you've left the customs union, Owen. It's another Brexit promise, isn't it? It's a bit like the 350 million for the NHS. It didn't happen, and your promise of jam tomorrow for farmers is problematic.
They have a massive trade surplus with us. They will want to do a deal. So your first point, that we'll automatically have tariffs, is frankly wrong. We want free trade. If you look at countries...
You cannot guarantee that. You cannot say that we will have tariff-free trade with the European Union. That is all up for debate over the next 2 years.
If you look at other countries with free trade arrangements, such as Australia and New Zealand, which I went to see, seeing what they do on their borders, they have really rigorous biosecurity control, intelligence-based, and they are extremely effective at keeping out invasive plant and animal diseases. So getting up control of our borders back is a fundamental, massive environmental gain, completely regardless of the tariff question.
I want to ask you about pollution, environmental pollution. It seems now that diesel cars, which were pushed by the European Union, are disastrous for our atmosphere. So won't coming out of the European Union actually mean we can have sensible rules about pollution in the atmosphere? Well,
the danger on air pollution is that we will have no mechanism, enforcement mechanism, to make the government adhere to those air pollution targets. And that's a very big issue, for example, when we're planning the expansion of Heathrow, and our committee did a report last Thursday on exactly that topic. I think at the time when there was a massive expansion of diesel cars, what policymakers right across the European Union didn't realise was the damaging effects of nitrogen dioxide and just how that interplays with human health. The issue is, though, that we are going to keep making cars, hopefully, that we sell to the EU, and we're going to keep buying cars, hopefully, that are made in the EU. So this is an issue that needs to be tackled at a European and probably global level.
Well, you're right. This is a catastrophe made in Europe. The serious number of people that have been very ill or worse have died because of diesel pollution. That was a direct result coming from them. And the problem is, we're only one of 28 at the moment. We cannot amend this legislation.